Pauline Campbell became a lawyer at 41 years old. She now works for the Waltham Forest, and she also works as a supervising lawyer for the Windrush Justice Clinic. In spring 2020, she wrote an amazing book which is called Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips, where she tells her personal story of overcoming racism in England. Pauline belongs to the first generation immigrant child of Caribbean parents. Growing up, she faced systemic racism fed by a political resistance to overcoming racial issues. Through her child, her teenager, and her adult eyes, we live her story and her way to experience what she's been through and the racism she faced. And she puts this into perspective with the political setting, whether it is Enoch Powell's statements or Summer 1981 in Brixton, or whether it is Stephen Lawrence's murder. She explains how her community and how her family faced and experienced all those public matters. Doing so, she somehow allows us to understand what it is, what it means to be black in this world, in England, and what effect it can have on your personal story and on your personal journey. Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips is a story of gaining her confidence back when the whole world and the whole England and her daily life tells Pauline that she won't achieve, that she won't succeed. The very aim of the book is here, getting rid of the victimhood that surrounds the matter of racism and telling people, well, that's what's happening and it's real. And it does have such bad consequences on our lives. For the Hackney Gazette, which is a local newspaper in North London, I've been covering and writing an article about Pauline's book, Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips. And so we've been discussed. I got the chance to interview her to write this review, and while I was listening to it, I just realized it was a really nice interview, really nice discussion with some important things being said. So I decided just to do a little video. You can read, I think I will put the link to the article in the description. And enjoy the discussion. I hope you will finish this video with new thoughts and new interesting things to think about, and I hope you will read Pauline's book, because it's really amazing. So my very first question is to know where when the moment when you decided to write this book, when was it, how long did it take you, and why? But do you remember the very moment you decided to write it?
It's really hard. I think it was a couple of years ago when it just came to me that so many things were happening in society. And my dad, when I lost my dad a long time ago, it made me really think and reflect on my life. But then I was doing a lot of writing, and I read the publishers that took on the book. They did a writing competition about equalities. And so I thought, well, I really want to get my voice out there, and nobody knows who I am. So I've got to try and do something that will get me noticed. So I entered a couple of competitions, writing competitions, and it was around the topic of equality. And that's when it gave me the idea that even though I had this book in my head when Dad passed away, I'd never really formulated it in my mind as such. So it was already kind of written, but I never did anything with it. And then when I entered this competition, I took a snippet from it. And then that's where it all started, this proper book. And in March 2020, I actually got it published. At 5,000 words of it was published by the London Reader in their journal. And so that's where it all started effectively. Had written quite a lot about my dad and everything, but for the competition, I decided to focus on our inequality, where we started, when I was born, how it all developed, you know. But I only had 5,000 words, and then it was reduced to 3.5. And so it was just a tiny snippet of my life. But it was wonderful because then Nobrow, who are my publishers, they said, "Do you have any more?" And I said, "Of course I do." And so I was able to build on what I'd written and give them the background to it all. Hence, you've got the book there.
Oh, right. That's great. Okay. Okay, and did you win the competition then?
No, because what happened was once the London Reader published it, I had to withdraw from the competition because 2 people actually liked what I'd written.
Yeah.
But the good news was, even though I had to withdraw from the competition, they contacted me and said they'd liked what I'd written so much. Do I have anything else?
Wow.
And so I thought, wow, yeah, I do. So I had to withdraw, and then they contacted me after that.
Okay. So overall, how long did it take to write this book as it is now?
With the edits and everything, I would say about 2 years with the edits and everything. Because they give you the contract and then you've got at least a year to get everything drafted, redrafted, re-edited, and then the final version finally gets to them. So about 2 years, I'd say, of hard grafting.
Okay, and what were the challenges of writing? Were there some parts that were more challenging for you, or some topics that were more challenging?
Yeah, I think the all of it was hard because it was about me and my family, my life. All of it was hard, but there were parts of it, particularly when I was at 13, when I watched Roots for the first time, and then I had my best friend who was a white girl who I really loved, who was really good to me, and I had found myself questioning that part of my life, and that was like coming to a realization that I was different, which was really hard to take because I didn't want to be different. I wanted to be the same as my friends, and I realized that it was going to be different for me. Another hard part was that you have to accept that, you know, things are unfair and you don't want to, but you have to. And then you also feel, a biggest part for me was the guilt I felt at being thankful that I wasn't enslaved, you know, and that I was free. And then I thought about, oh my God, what if I lived 100 years before? What would have happened to me? And is there reincarnation? Am I really living this life? Have I lived a life of slavery before in the past? You know, as a child, your head just fills with all these different things. But they were all logical and practical things that a child would think about, you know, when they're faced with this awful thing of their ancestral past and how white people played such a significant role in that. And I had to hide and keep fighting the fear of hating people just because of the colour of their skin. That was really hard. But then what I did was I thought, well, slavery didn't end, but for other people being a part of it, all people were a part of ending it, not just black people, white people were a part of it. So we have to remember there were good and bad in the whole thing, which helped me to deal with it, but it took a long time.
I like the quote that you wrote, which is, unless you go through it yourself, it's impossible to understand how being treated like that make you feel. Would you say it's also a reason why you wrote this book as well?
Yes. Do you know why I did it? Because it's so hard for people to understand that this isn't us, the chip on our shoulders. This isn't us moaning and griping about inequality, because one of the things that I understand is that people might say, oh God, here we go again, you know, what is this about? But to be honest with you, I wanted to find a way for people to step into our shoes, even if it was just within the words of the page, because maybe then they'd understand that the last 50 odd years haven't been made up. There's a reason why inequality is still here. because of a historical ongoing issues of people not willing to open their minds and be innovative and more adaptable to change. That's why nothing's happened. So that's why I did it, and that's why I used Colin Freeman to do the foreword for the book, because he was completely detached from my world, and he was the perfect person to do it, because he didn't agree with everything I said, but his last paragraph in his foreword put it all in place for me, when he talked about being in the hospital with his daughter and a black man having a son, and thought about what would it be like for his son and what would it be like for his daughter, and wouldn't it be good if everything could be equal. And that told me that he got it. He got it. And that's why I think so many people who are not black are reading this book, because they're getting it. It's not easy to read, though. I know it's not pleasant, but it's enlightening, but it also has a good ending, a good journey towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so what did he not agree with?
He didn't tell me. He said, as a journalist, there's things that I'm not going to agree with everything you say, but that he wouldn't go into it. But what he did agree with, which was clear to me, was that he felt it was heartfelt. He felt that it reached out to people, and he also accepted that he knew inequality existed and that there was different rules for different people. So for me, he understood the key points and was very generous in the foreword that he did for me.
Okay, that's amazing. And also, you compare at some point racism with a bad smell. It makes that's so relevant how you say it. No one wants to mention it because it's such an uncomfortable subject. So how do you think do we mention such an uncomfortable subject, and what are the best ways to mention it according to you?
By being honest with each other about the fact that we don't get it right, nor blacks or whites get it right. We're living in a world where we are faced with currently where we're faced with a government who are looking at changing human rights, taking it away from Strasbourg. And on top of doing that, they're also looking at internally changing the judicial review process. So internally, they're attacking the courts. So if we lose Strasbourg and we also lose the protection of the courts, it's two-pronged attack on human rights. And that doesn't matter what colour you are, it's going to affect you. So yesterday, I'm so anal. I was supposed to be going out with my family, but I spent the whole day doing a piece for the Law Society on the new bill, because that's what I do. One of the ways that we can deal with this issue of racism and inequality is to talk about it in a forum that people can get to grips with. So I've done 3 letters to my Law Society about inequality and lack of diversity. Now I've done something on the new bill. And what I do is I encourage people to read about what this means, but also understand the future as to where we're going in relation to inequality, and never just pin it down to colour, because it's about everything to do with inequality. The example I used to take it away from being black was I looked at the blood contamination scandal and how for 40 years people have been fighting for justice because they've been contaminated by factor 8, and they still haven't had compensation, which rings true with Windrush and all the rest of it. And I put that down as what we need to think about. So for me, we share our experiences, but we also have a knowledge about what inequality is, which includes racism. Because people say when it comes to inequality, black people are at the bottom, white people are at the top, and everybody else is in between. And that is the truth. If you are black and your skin is this colour, it is harder, irrespective of whether people want to accept it or not. It is harder. And you have to find a way to share that with people so that they understand it's harder and help you through it, and you help them to understand.
Yeah, that's very true. That echoes to my very own struggles with feminism, namely as well. Like the
Isn't it?
and
Yeah.
yeah,
And
sharing.
also, you say that with us as women, and even if your accent isn't the same, I can speak to you on the phone and you won't know that I'm black. But as soon as they see me, there is a change in somebody's perception. The difference is if you've got a strong African accent or a strong Eastern European accent, or you've got a German accent, or you've got an accent that is clear, or an Asian accent, there will be a preconceived idea about who you are even before you walk into a room.
Mm-mm-mm.
And that is the life in which we live. And that's why I wrote this book as well, because I said the biggest problem about racism or any inequality are those of us who do nothing. We are the catalyst to allow it to continue. So the, to me, the book is a way of sharing that experience from a black perspective, but accepting that it's just my perspective as a black woman, but it encompasses every single, as a woman, if you say something, well, there she goes again, you know, you were using that card, oh, here we go again, a woman's liberty. You see, it happens in every aspect of our lives. Colour is just one of them.
Absolutely. Okay. Um, what was interesting with your book as well is that when I was working on my questions, I realized that every question were in the books, because at the end of every chapter, or in every chapter you ask yourself some question. And one of them is really interesting to me. In the chapter where you wrote about Swamp 81, you finished the chapter asking, what would it have done to me to be actually a police? Would you say
Yeah.
policewoman?
Police officer. Yeah,
Police
police
officer?
officer, I'd say.
So what
Yeah.
do you think it would have done to you?
Yeah, I don't know. That's the scary part. To be honest, I think now I'm in a better place to know. I think that I wouldn't have lasted in there for very long, because I realized that you would lose the only thing that mattered to you, your family. Because my dad wasn't joking. He would not have spoken to me again if I'd done it. But more importantly, my family would have been ostracized by others because they couldn't trust my family if I was in there. And I was in the midst of Tottenham. And one of the things I noticed that they did in the 70s, in the 80s, was they would put black police officers in the front line when they were walking alongside the National Front. There was no sensitivity attached to the fact that maybe this isn't the place for a black officer to be, but that's where they would put them. And there was no feeling of this is something that's wrong. So I think my dad said that to me. You do realize that they will put you right in the middle of everything, and you're not going to be able to handle it. But luckily it kind of worked out because I didn't get in.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah, I didn't get in.
Also in the chapter where you intervene in a fight between two men, which is really impressive, you wrote a question again: is there any difference between a racist and another? And also the question of, was it really the same person, really interests me.
Yeah. But you know what? To this day, I think it was the same person, but I don't know if that's my subconscious telling me it was the same person. He looked like the same person. I believed it was him, but does it matter whether it was him or not? He's the same person, irrespective of whether it was the same man that did it the day before or whether it was that man that did it that day. But I will never know whether it was, but in my heart, I feel it was him. I looked dead in his eyes, and I just knew it was him.
Yeah.
And it was surreal that weekend. It was the most surreal weekend I'd ever had.
Yeah. It says something about also the perception of like racism, whatever who you are and where you come from. If you're racist, it like you can be anything else. We don't care. You're a racist first of all, you know. So
Yeah, and that stood out to me. And it was when I was telling my dad was so matter of facty about it. He says, "Why did you take that weapon out?" If you're going to take a weapon out, how do you know somebody's not going to use it on you? That's what Dad said. I didn't tell Dad about all the other stuff I'd done, though, about me being it and me being a part of it. But I couldn't stand by and watch that happen. It was impossible. And one thing I would say about that man, no matter how racist he was, he didn't touch me. He didn't raise a hand to me. And so it's in a way, no matter how crude and disgusting he was, he had a code not to hit a woman. And even that makes me think there's something about him. When he looked at me, he had an option. He could have knocked me down. He could have hurt me badly, but he didn't touch me. And I always wondered why he didn't.
Yeah.
And that told me there might have been hope in there. He looked at me and realised, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to hit this woman. You know, so it was weird weekend. Good weekend because we beat Arsenal.
Yeah, but as you say, roller coasters, ups and downs.
Roller coaster, yeah. But I think that's what gave me the courage to change my mindset. That's the beginning of it, I think.
Okay. Your story is a success story. So what I'm wondering is, first of all, what do you think in your either personality or education made a difference in your journey in terms of resilience and persistence, if I may say it like this?
I think for me and my family, me in general, you have a passion and it lies dormant. If you're meant to succeed, it doesn't matter how hard you pretend you're not meant to. If it's dormant in you, it will come alive when the time is right. And for me, I had that. I always wanted to be a lawyer and I always wanted to do something different with my life. But for 16 years, I didn't do anything about it because I didn't believe that I was good enough. And in a way, that's my fault as well. And my dad told me not to believe it, and I didn't. I listened to what my teacher told me. But whether I listened to what my teacher told me or not, I was so glad that I found the strength to find me. And when Dad died, that was the beginning of finding me, because I knew so little about why my dad was the way he was. And I needed to understand why my generation were the way they were and why Black people as a whole are fragmented. You've got all these other cultures that do things together, that support each other financially, and they come together, the Orthodox Jewish community, the Asian communities, all the European communities, when they do something, they come together. But for us, we didn't do that. We were all individualizing our lives. And I realized why. Because we were fighting in our corner. The only way to survive was to just fight in our corner. And so we had no time to be gelling with each other because we were too busy trying to keep our own heads above water, because it was harder for us than everyone else. And so writing a book really helped me to understand that. But now we're coming together more so than we've ever done before. And white people and Black people and brown people are coming together in a way they've never done before. So I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for it.
Yeah, that's something you said when you passed passed by the boys in the street, and I think you wondered how come that you were so judgmental. Yeah.
We do it, don't we? Yeah. I'm thinking, why aren't you in school? What's the matter with you? Why can't you get a job? But then when I looked at it, I realized I was those boys. Yes, I didn't get excluded because Dad would have killed me, but I was one of those boys in school where nobody had any faith in me. And I was like that. And by the grace of God, I had a family, that I had a roof over my head, and I was never so rude at school that I got kicked out. But if I had got kicked out of school, I would have been just like them. So it made me realize we are judgmental. It doesn't matter what color we are judgmental, and we need to look back on our lives and accept that there's things we could have done differently. But it's wonderful to come to the realization that there are things that you did wrong in judging those boys, because I did judge them.
And do you think, you kind of say it in the book, but I would like to have your answer. how do you think we could prevent what you faced in terms of lack of self-esteem as a child and then as a teenager in this society for Black kids in general, I guess?
Opening the minds of those people who are responsible for moulding us. We have to accept, and this government are responsible for a lot of this pain, not just this government, the previous governments. They give the impression that racism isn't that a bigger deal. They say it's a problem, but they say it's not that big a problem because it's inequality for everybody that's the problem. And that is the worst possible thing that they could be doing, because they're giving a false impression of how people's life choices are affected by the colour of their skin, or by their sex, or by their disability, or by their voice, or by every part of them. They are taking away from the issues by pretending or by trying to limit it and dilute it. And it's so scary where we are right now, in the sense of we have our own people in government, people like Kemi Badenoch, people like Tony Sewell, who did the race disparity. They are saying out loud that it ain't that bad, or we need to get rid of this victimhood. We need to stop thinking this way. Or Tony Sewell will say that a number of Black boys are from single parent families, without thinking about the background that led to those single parent families. And so for me, they're using our own people to make it look as if there is not that big a deal. And I want, one day, my dream is to be in a room with Kemi Badenoch and Tony Sewell, to talk to them about the damage they are doing to the fight against racism in this country by standing alongside Boris Johnson and agreeing with the fact that things are not as bad as people think. Because the key is, you just need to look at what's happening in sports with the cricket, and you need to look at what's happening in the world with the footballers this summer after they lost the European Cup. All these things tell you, please, these sportsmen are at the top of their game. They have achieved the goal of getting to as far as they can be. They're wearing an England shirt, and even they are experiencing racism, even when they make it. So when the government say it's about geography, it's about life choices, it's got nothing to do with that. It's to do with the mindset of people. And so that is why I need, with every ounce of my being, to get to talk to them about the damage they're doing and why they need to stop doing it. It's so sad. If we were in a country and we were in a war zone now, they would be determined to be collaborators. And that scares me, because they would be determined to be collaborators, because Boris Johnson is using them for his own ends. And as soon as they're no longer relevant to him, they're gone. And then that is the saddest part of all. The Black faces are there because it's what people want to see right now, and that's why the government have put them there. So one day I'll get the opportunity to celebrate that in a more enlightened way, but I hope the book has helped to do that as well.
Yeah, well, I truly believe it has.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have how can I say that? Because in my own country, to be very honest, we have I don't know if you've heard of what's happening in France right now, but we have a far-right person who decided to be candidate, who is Eric Zemmour, and I think he's the worst human being on earth. More so, I think he's like the worst we can think about. And recently, our former Minister of Justice, Christian Taubira, decided to be a candidate as well. So it gave me hope. And I was wondering for you, is there something that gives you hope right now in the politic landscape? Or do you have hope? I guess you have, but like, what does give you hope right now?
Young people give me hope. Because they're a very different set of young people to our generation. They are strong, They are resilient and they're not standing for it. And because they are our future, they give me hope. But what also gives me hope is that I'm in a place right now where I have no fear anymore. We all have it, but even in my job, I don't hold back on when I feel inequality exists, but I don't do it in a confrontational way. I do it so that people understand the damage that it does by helping them to understand what they're doing. And that gives me hope. Why? Because people are listening to what I have to say and they are acting upon it. We are in the midst of right-wing politics, more so now than ever before. We are dealing with a government in this country who is trying to take away our rights individually, and they want the power to make decisions. If a law is done that they don't agree with, they want to change it. And that's France. France is moving. It's a tide. France is moving and has always been a kind of like along that path, but there's been a fight against it. And so what I say is we are in a war zone right now. We are in a war zone where the liberal-minded people are in a war and they need to brush themselves off and get down and dirty to deal with this war. There's no point us trying to tiptoe around the fact that, oh, we need to all try and do the right thing. We need to understand that we have to be knowledgeable, understand what's happening, share our knowledge, and work together to fight what's happening in this country and what's happening around the world. And when Trump lost the elections and I saw those people burst into Capitol Hill and I saw Biden get in, that gave me hope as well. But I know that Trump isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And I know that a number of right-wingers are now building up for the next elections and looking at ways of getting back in. And so for me, it's terrifying, but the only way we can do what we do is to know how to be knowledgeable in fighting these people, because intellect and an understanding will win the day for us, because our own history will win the day for us. So that's my dream, that I pray that France does the right thing. I pray that people see Boris Johnson and Kemi Badenoch and all these ministers for what they are. But a lot of people don't, because they're not interested. That's how Hitler got in, because they weren't interested in what was happening around them. Hence the right-wing politics that we have today. So yeah, enlightenment and acknowledgement and knowledge is what will keep us strong, and our young people will keep us strong too.
You said a few already, but not so much is said about your life right now, actually, as a lawyer. So do you think there will be a second book about the work you're doing now? And also, what do you do with the Windrush Reach Project or the Waltham Forest Council?
Okay, yeah. Well, at the moment, I'm the co-chair for the Race Equality Network at Waltham Forest. It's massive. I don't know what's happened. It's just spiraled, and I'm kind of heading it. And what we do is we give a voice to people who don't have a voice. Literally, what I've put in the last chapter of the book. And people are finding their voices through us, through what I do, through what we do as a group here. Managers find their voices. People who wouldn't know how to talk to staff who aren't from their backgrounds are beginning to understand, just like I put in the book, how they can start those difficult conversations. And one of the biggest parts about starting a difficult conversation is to say to me, I don't know how to start this. And that's the beginning of the conversation, because you're telling me you don't know, and we can now work on being honest with each other. Okay. So that's what I do in the council. We're doing too many initiatives, so many. And I'm also the legal advisor for the Windrush Reach project, which is a referral service that meets with people, goes through a detailed referral that we make to organisations that offer free legal advice for applications for the Windrush. So I do that. I'm the only legal advisor they have. So what I do is I have hour-long meetings with individuals who come to us, and then I go through the process, tell them what they need to do, and then I draft up a detailed referral form. They check it, and then we send it over to an organisation that will forward their application. But before that, I was a supervisor on the Windrush Justice Clinic, working with third year law students at Westminster University. But I moved on to do the Windrush Reach because it was more locally based, and there's only so much you can do in a day. So I had to do one or the other. And this is something that I can do, well, not really do alongside the day job, but I find time to do it alongside the day job. And my book,
Yeah.
I've written a fictional book, I've written a book which is it's an erotic novel, and I'm now, it did pretty well in 2015, but because I love writing so much, I created a black solicitor and a white barrister, and it's a romance and a thriller, and what happens to these people. And so I've revamped that now, and I'm looking for a literary agent for that at the moment on the revamped version. But I'm looking to do another book, and I'm hoping my publishers will pick it up. And it's on a very unusual subject. It's on the Nuremberg trials.
Sorry.
Because after Germany, after the Second World War, they had the first international trials where they tried the Germans.
Okay.
It's about that, and it's called The Hypocrisy of Justice, because what it looks at is how could the Americans and how could the British and how could these world leaders be the judge and jury of these people when they themselves were initiating such racist ideals at the time. How could that happen? Of course, these men needed to be taken to task for what they did and for the atrocities. But this trial has been celebrated throughout the world for decades, but nobody has ever looked heartily at the fact that the judges of these people were dealing with Jim Crow laws, dealing with segregation, lynching Black people at the same time that they were judging the Germans, and also that the British were the first to instigate concentration camps. And these are the things that we go back, these are the things I looked at, and I thought, I've never seen anyone write a book like that. And it's not to lambast the UK, it's about racism and how people see it. When they called them the most racist regime, that's what the British were calling them. And the Americans were calling them the most racist regime, the Nazis. Yet in their own country, people were being lynched in their hundreds for just being Black, and segregation existed. And American soldiers had to sit outside whilst German prisoners ate inside. And that is something that really has intrigued me. So I don't know, my publishers have listened to my pitch on it, and I've written most of it, but if they don't want it, then I'll find some publishers who do, because I think it'll be taken from the premise of a Black woman as well, because I don't see that many Black female historians in this country.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think we need to start building on ourselves as Black women and women generally, in showing the world we can do these things and we can talk about them in a knowledgeable way. And you should see my house. I've got all this research, all these books. I'm just waiting to start it. I'm really praying they say they want it, because then I can at least focus next year on it.
Oh, that's amazing. So for now, you've been researching, you didn't start to write it yet?
No, I've written it. But what I've done is I've written the blueprint for it. It's like massive. It's like 2 massive LibreArch files. Now I have to inject myself in it because it's too factual. So I now have to do what I did with Rice and Peas and Fish and Chips and inject me into that book and give my premise of what I think about it, but make it about women, men, generally the ordinary Joe blogs who's sitting in the back watching this for people to see. And that is what's hard. How do you do that in an historical book? How do you do that? So now I've got to, that is my next task. But the good news is it's so exciting to write it that I think it will be quite powerful if when it gets published, it will be quite powerful. A lot of people will be interested in that.
Yeah, definitely. I will be. Do you think your story, your personal story, represents what your generations has faced? And
Yeah,
what extent, yeah.
I found that so many people have reached out to me. I don't know how many people have bought this book, but I think quite a few people have, because people are reaching out to me from all over the world and all over Britain about, oh my God, I was in tears when I read this book because I could see myself in it. And even down to WhatsApps, when people respond to me talking about the book, they don't just do a line, they do like pages about how, and then they come back and say, I'm really sorry, but I just have to add this, I just have to add that. I'm talking about pages of how they feel about it. But what's really been good is that I've had people who are completely from a different world to me, white people who live in a different world. Maybe it's more privileged, I'd say, because of the work they do. People from very, very high professional backgrounds have reached out to me and thanked me for writing this book and enlightening them about our lives. It's resonated with people from all over, no matter what background.
One final question. Rice and peas or fish and chips?
Oh, I can't decide. I love them both equally. Because you know what Dad used to do when we were little? Dad would come home in the middle of the night. Mum would always do rice and peas on a Sunday. It was lovely and we loved it. But Dad would come home after going out on a Friday night, and he'd come home with fish and chips. But we would be sleeping. And me and my sister were talking about this yesterday. And you could smell the fish and chips, and it would be dead in the middle of the night. And we would smell it. And you could hear Daddy saying, I wonder if they're awake. And we used to knock the door and say, we're awake. So Mum used to pull little bits off the paper and put little about 4 or 5 chips in each little bit of paper and a little bit of fish. And then we would eat that. And that was the nicest food we ever ate. So for me, he would love his rice and peas, but even Dad loved his fish and chips. And that's a meal we would share together. So you can't choose. You just can't. And that's what makes us so strong as a people. I'm filled with a wonderful culture from both sides, which I embrace. And I'm not ashamed of either one of them. I embrace them both equally. That's why the title's so perfect.
Yeah, it is. It is. So this is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. It was absolutely great to interview Pauline, and I really, really thank her because it was a really interesting discussion. It was even more cool for me because it was my very first review of a book written for a newspaper, and that's something I always dreamt of doing. Like, I read a lot, and it's always my dream to just be able to interview authors. And here I could do it, so I had so many questions, and she was really, really nice really patient with my Franglish, and that's why I made this video as well from the recording I had, is that because it's like meaningful for me to have this video in order to remember my very first review of a book.